US aid was spending money on things that were antithetical, both not simply to governments, but to entire populations. Africa and transgender issues would be a good example of that.
Welcome to Restoring America, a project of the Washington Examiner. I'm Jeremiah Poff, the editor of Restoring America, alongside my colleague Tom Rogan. Tom, it's good to be with you again.
Good to be with you, Jeremiah.
So are you going to be taking a week-long vacation at the Trump Gaza Riviera Resort?
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
What do you think about that, to start?
First of all, it's been a crazy 3 weeks of the Trump administration. It's just, a nonstop fire hose of new and different way of doing things. But I was rather surprised when the president came out with Bibi Netanyahu, and I think Bibi Netanyahu was also surprised when he came out and said, let's move everyone out of Gaza and rebuild the entire city as an American colony, effectively.
Right.
I don't think people should be going back to Gaza. I think that Gaza has been very unlucky for them. They've lived like hell. They lived like you're living in hell. Gaza is not a place for people to be living.
It's a rather difficult thing for the president to square with his promise of not getting involved overseas. And my gut instinct is that it's not actually going to happen and that he's using this as a negotiating tactic to push the Gulf states to get more involved in the region.
Yeah, I think you're broadly correct that it's it's not going to happen, almost certainly. But my challenge to the argument that it's designed as a mechanism to leverage the Gulf states to do more is that politically, it is toxic for them, for Jordan, for Saudi Arabia, for countries that, essentially all the countries really of the region that manifest power without sort of democratic popular legitimacy. Their populations are extremely hostile to the notion, both of Israeli or American, as they see it, perceived occupation of Gaza. And so the idea of making Gaza, a American colony, doesn't simply, infuriate those populations and encourage them to put pressure on their governments not to cooperate with the US or Israel in any way. I think it makes it harder for those governments to actually engage in kind of serious dialogue towards, supporting a post-war, Gaza situation. And it's not as if, I think there has been, quite significant discussions behind the scenes with those countries about what they might be able to do to support Gaza after the war is done. So I sort of push back a little bit against the idea that they weren't doing anything before anyway.
Right, but it's such... there's a reason that Trump focused on it as a real estate development. It is effectively a prime piece of real estate, and something has to be done there. As I said, I don't think that we're ever going to be the ones building there, but I have to think that if Trump, with the big stick of American diplomacy, can tell these countries, like, look, I will actually carry this out, and they might be like, he's crazy enough to actually do this. Maybe Qatar and the UAE and Jordan are like, well, maybe, we can go in there and build it ourselves and police the region instead. And I don't know how the Israelis would feel about that, but it does seem like there's a possibility that could happen as a way to keep the U.S. from getting involved.
Yeah, I just think in the cost, even if that could happen, and even if that was necessary to kind of leverage that effect, the cost of it is to play to the worst kind of jihadist presentations in terms of their propaganda about America, wanting to steal Muslim land, wanting to occupy. It's a root and branch of what bin Laden and Baghdadi, the ISIS leader, the Iranians in their own vein of jihadist thought have been pushing, and so it undermines America's credibility with those allied countries and with those populations, and I just don't think it really gets us anything.
Another thing that's really been internationally is kind of riled up in terms of the Trump administration has riled up has been basically the foreclosure of U.S. aid. The Democrats are trumpeting the line that U.S. aid was America's soft power that kept countries dependent on us rather than China.
By shutting down USAID, DOGE is doing the work of Russia and China at the expense of the United States.
I kind of see it as the opposite, is that it was because of all the strings and the policy attached to this aid. It was to these socially conservative countries. You can't take our money unless you open a trans hospital or whatever it is. That was pushing these, African countries, Middle Eastern countries to China. I'm curious what you think about that, and if this is actually an opportunity to do something
Yeah, I think the promotion of basic human rights, it is important. But clearly, it had gone. USAID was spending money on things that were antithetical, both not simply to governments but to entire populations. Africa and transgender issues would be a good example of that. But I also think if you look at the grants that have come out, clearly there was a lot of money being spent on things that American taxpayers wouldn't support and that the original USAID mission remit wouldn't support. The idea of boosting economic development, relationships, alleviating extreme poverty and suffering, I think was the USAID orbit in a way that served American interests. So while I'm sympathetic to the fundamental reform, very sympathetic to that, my concern is that the mechanism of action that the Trump administration, Elon Musk, have taken, simply to suspend everything and then go and sort of pick things out, causes unnecessary suffering, undermines American relationships in terms of projects that are beneficial, that are popular with countries. And so I would have preferred to see a situation in which there was a staggered process in that everything was reviewed, certain programs were killed, instead of, 3,000, whatever it is, AID diplomats being told, right, you have to come home next Friday.
Do you think that this is actually that USAID's activities were helping China, though? China's influence?
I think there's no question that in Africa is the transgender example, clearly is a good one. The Middle East, certain things like that. Why are we flying? It's the extension is why are we flying a pride flag over our embassies? It should just be the American flag. That stuff causes significant harm. And the opportunity of American diplomacy and AID is to create rule of law based engagements that here's a grant or here's a thing. You show us the results, show us the return on investment. And China clearly takes the opposite approach, which is to be, Jeremiah, you're the manager, middle manager, X, Y, and Z are the top managers, and just to bribe you a load of money, and then we get the contract, and Chinese workers build it, and then it falls apart 20 years later. And if you can't pay back the debts, we own your country. And so America has an opportunity to be the counterpoint. But again, we shouldn't shoot ourselves in the foot. And a lot of the grants that, understandably the Trump administration is waving up as public examples.
As for the actual receipts, we are happy to provide them, and I actually brought some today because all of you know I love to bring the receipts. We have contracts upon contracts that we can send and provide this information to you. Let me be very clear. We are not trying to hide anything. We have been incredibly transparent, and we will continue to be. These are screenshots of contracts that DOGE found across our government.
The political level of that, how do you, and it's one thing I come back to on Ukraine, is that you have to show, how does a Republican congressman go back to his or her district and say, here's why this money is important, here's what it's doing, X, Y, and Z, and then, in North Carolina, you can't get aid or whatever. Like that is not a politically viable mechanism of action. So I think hopefully we can come to a better, understanding here. But
I think it's really interesting that Trump has he nominated anyone to lead USAID?
No, I don't think he has. I think it's going to be adopted under the State Department. I think that's what they want to do.
Right. Well, they've clearly made that here. I think it's really interesting that Trump keeps his cabinet confirmed officials. He's giving them extra jobs. Right. Like he did this. So Scott Bessent, after he got confirmed, was made the acting director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau until Russ Vought was confirmed to be OMB director, and now he's in charge of it. And then obviously with Marco Rubio, he made him the acting director of USAID. I think it's a really interesting.
You clearly see, though, don't you? I think that Trump's, this is part of his whole second term thing, is creating friction, stir the pot and see what comes out.
Well, I think it's a 4-year plan, because if you pick all these fights right at the very beginning and you get all the court cases started right at the very beginning, they're going to take time, but 2-3 years into the term, they're going to be resolved.
Exactly.
And you can actually at that point, you can make substantial, lasting change
Right.
in the administration, in the way that the bureaucracy functions, which I think is one of the most genius things that this administration has done. And my bold take is that if Trump had won in 2020, he would not have been doing this. I don't think he was prepared. I think he needed that time out of office in order to be this ruthlessly effective in attacking the bureaucracy right at its core.
Yeah, there's a clear sense of the urgency of now, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and be sure to read more at washingtonexaminer.com.